Hi, I'm Dr. David Purvis. I'm talking about COVID stress. Some recent research has been published which suggests that British people are more anxious than they've ever been. And additionally, on top of that, there are huge levels of COVID stress. Stress about COVID-19 catching it and what to do. So the first thing I'd like to do to tell you a little bit more about COVID stress is this. COVID stress piles on top of pre-existing anxiety. So if you have a tendency to be anxious, if you're a bit of a worrier, if you're a bit of an overthinker, it's quite likely that you're going to experience more COVID stress because those thought patterns of anxiety that you've been practicing now are open and accessible to the actual threat of COVID-19. Now, in my previous work, I've talked about the two realities. The first reality is internal reality, and the second reality is external reality. Now, anxiety is entirely an internal reality problem. And by this I mean that if you're anxious generally, and I was to say to you, what's the threat? You would look around and you would be unable to find an external reality threat. That's a threat in the external world, which tells you that anxiety is generated in here in internal reality. However, COVID-19 is both an internal reality threat and it's an external reality threat. It's an external reality threat, of course, because there is an actual external reality threat. There is a virus that you may catch, you may become unwell, or you may be asymptomatic, and people that you know and love could catch it. That's an external world threat, external reality threat. But there's also the internal reality threat that connects with those anxiety thought processes. And you can catastrophize, yeah, it could be terrible, it could be really bad, what would I feel like, what would happen? So all that what-ifing, that worrying, that ruminating, that overthinking, that attaches itself to the COVID-19 external reality threat. But that is just a list of internal reality processes. I think it's really important to recognize that you can't predict how the pandemic and how the lockdown, etc., will affect you. I know some people that are perfectly comfortable and perfectly happily just going about their business, but doing it from a home base in a sense. And I know other people that feel really anxious and they hanker after getting back to more normal life, getting back to the office, even getting back to the commute. So you can't predict how it will affect you, and I think it's just really important to recognize that. Now, only dead fish go with the flow. And what this means is that if you go with the flow, you're going with the flow of whatever is happening. You're not really challenging it. Take a look at this cartoon. What this cartoon shows is that if you go with the flow, you might well end up where you don't want to be. The example would be on the River Thames, for instance. The River Thames has a flow from its headwaters, I think in Gloucestershire, all the way down through London to the sea. And if you're in a boat on the River Thames and you have no engine, you're simply going with the flow, which means that you will go wherever the river takes you. You have no control over what happens. However, to get control, you just need to turn a little bit around, go against the flow, just a slightly bit faster than the water, and you have got full control over where you go. And that's what we want to manage COVID-19 stress. Going with the flow, which is basically saying, I'm anxious, that's what it is. COVID-19, the threat's out there, that's just what it is. I just feel threatened, that's just what it is. That's going with the flow. And going with the flow is likely to make your comfort zone smaller, and it's likely to make you more threatened, make you feel more threatened, likely to make you catastrophize more, and just reduce and reduce and reduce the things that you do, and so you've become more and more isolated. So what we need to do to manage COVID stress is this. We need to recognize that it piles on top of pre-existing anxiety, and so therefore we need to use anxiety challenging tools to reduce the effects of our pre-existing anxiety. We've got to recognize that it is a genuine external reality threat, but it's not a catastrophic threat that's unmanageable. What we have to do is go, okay, there is an external reality threat, but what do I need to do to stay safe, but yet also just push a bit against the pre-existing anxiety, and just push a bit so that my comfort zone is getting at least a little bit bigger or staying the same, but it's not getting smaller. If it gets smaller, you start to feel out of control. If it's staying the same or getting a little bit bigger, you're starting to feel in control. So we're using anxiety challenging tools to keep pushing against that prevailing threat that we get by contemplating the terrible things that might happen to us. There is a certain seduction in fear. And if you watch the news, almost by definition it's bad news. cases are going up, people are getting infected, people are dying. And of course that's true, but it's also news reported from a whole population or from the whole world. And so we have to be careful what we allow into our system. If you allow endless stories that evoke fear, then you're going to end up feeling very frightened, but more frightened than you need to be. If you ration your news intake, if you ration the things that you allow into your system, you're going to have a little bit more control, and that will enable you to create, I'm going to call the COVID stress calculus, which is basically this. You decide where you want your safety to be. You don't just allow the anxiety to tell you what to do, which is basically making decisions based on fear. You decide where you want your sense of safety to be. You do this, you don't do this. You challenge this, you don't challenge that. You're kind of internalizing your sense of control rather than allowing your pre-existing anxiety or COVID-19 to manage you. You're keeping yourself safe, but you're pushing a little bit against the flow, so that you're always recognizing that the pre-existing anxiety is a powerful force, and you have to keep pushing it. If you want to get some tools to manage the pre-existing anxiety, and I have to say the recent data suggests that almost a third of women aged between 18 and 24 are anxious. So that's really huge. More anxiety and depression in the country than there has ever been. If you want to get some tools to push against that, to push against the flow and to manage that, then please join the Anxiety Wizard program.